Well, thank you very much, Olen. This is terrific. I'm so glad we met each other in Warren at our premiere showing, and that was just so much fun to get a chance to meet you. And is that the first time you'd seen the movie?
Yes, yes.
What'd you think of it?
Well, I learned a few things I didn't know. I thought it was a good representation. As with everything else, when you start out, you don't think about 20 or 30 years later what's going to happen, so a lot of things go by the board. And it's just the way it is, you know. You don't think about saving these things or recording them per se.
Right.
And I thought the evening, it was well worth my trip.
Okay.
I got to see a couple of the guys I haven't seen in quite a while, and there are other guys that I see, you know, because I'm still involved in racing, not dirt track anymore, but I'm still involved. Was supposed to help Lake Erie Speedway out for the first 3 weeks they were open, and I'm still there. So, yeah, you might say I guess I'm an addict. I don't know, but
How did you get exposed? I mean, you were in the photographic business. How did that little bug say get involved in racing? How did that happen?
blackmail.
Okay.
I actually went to my first race at Eriez Speedway against my will.
Is that right?
Yes. And when we were there, they started announcing during the races that they were looking for a photographer. Mm-hmm. And the person who I was pleasing, what happened was we were having a party here on the 4th of July.
Right.
And one of our friends, he was interested in a car that somebody where he worked drove, and so he wanted me to go to the races. Well, I didn't want to, and my wife, she cornered me in the kitchen and said, "We better go. You know how Bob is." I'm not giving you a last name, but so I said, "Oh, all right, I'll go." You know, so I went, and I kind of enjoyed the race, probably more than I thought I would. Well, the next week come and he called and wanted me to go again, and I did. They were still announcing they wanted a photographer, and his wife got to heckle on me. "You ought to do that, you know." And I told her, "No, I ain't going to do it just because you want me to, you know." And I guess it was that race at intermission. I did go up to the press box and talk to them. And basically they said, "Well, you know, next week bring your camera with you. Go out, try it. If you like it, okay. If you don't, why, no harm done, you know, just do whatever." So I took the camera with me and I went out, and I wasn't really happy with a lot of what I got, but later on, I went for a second week, and at the end of it, I'd planned on telling them that I wasn't going to continue because I had no idea of who was leading the race or anything else. When I was sitting in the stand, I could tell you who the top 10 were, you know. Yeah. And well, I didn't run into the owners, and I didn't make it a special point to go talk to them, but so I went the third week, and I took the camera, and I still, you know, I started doing what I was doing, and can we break and tell her to get that shut down?
Pick up a little bit on the fact that, what time frame was this? When you first did your Eriez track photography?
Boy, the 1960s somewhere.
Really?
I did it for 13 and a half years.
Who was
And I quit in 71, so figure
Okay.
back.
Okay. And so who was your predecessor? Was anybody at the track?
To the best of my knowledge, there wasn't.
And the track started in 60...
I think that Gordy Mann may have done a few for them, you know, because he was there before I was. He was at State Line, and I had the feeling that he'd done some, but didn't want to travel every Sunday to. That's my.
But I'm sorry, Olen, the numbers don't add up here. If you quit, you didn't quit in 71. You must have quit in 81. Because if you
Yeah,
quit
80,
in 71, then you would have started in 58 and the track wasn't even built.
Yeah. Okay. So it
quit-
must have been 81
You
then.
quit in 81, so that means you could have started in about 68. That sound about
Sound
right?
about right. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. I actually tried to figure out exactly when I did, and I don't have any reference to go because I didn't date the pictures or anything like that when I first started. I mean, it was an immaterial thing, you know, at the time.
How would it work? So you took the photographs on race day, then you took them home, you developed them, and brought back the 8x10s or whatever the size was. And would you show them to Jerry and Don and Leonard, or was it?
They seldom saw any of them, other than what was in the program.
Okay.
The first couple of years, I just developed the pictures that were my choice, and I captioned them, and they were forwarded to New York where it was printed. And then a little later on, I got to doing articles in the program and still did the pictures. And again, it was my thing. I never was, well, I never allowed myself to be, but anything that I wrote was my responsibility. In other words, occasionally, sometimes I even said things that made the track owners a little warm under the collar. But they gave me pretty much of a free rein. I spent obviously most of my time at the track in the infield. The pictures that I made were, again, my choice. My father was my pit man, and he had some of the albums there you see. He carried those into the pits at the next race night, and if it was a flag, he would show them to the driver. There was also a set that went up into up by the press box that my wife took care of, and so the fans could go up and order them or buy them or whatever. I have remnants in there. I could probably make at least 100 more of those pins you saw, badges with photos on them. I had the machine, and we did all that during the week in our spare time, whatever that was. Those were things that they hadn't had before at all, and probably about, I think, around 3 years after I started doing Erie, Gordy Mann had stated he was going to quit at State Line, and he approached me and asked me if I would, before he, what do I want to say, resigned. I mean, there was no problem. He just didn't want to do it. If I wanted to do both of them, and I said, yeah, I would like to. And So when he resigned, I just started going up to State Line and doing it. So eventually they had the color pictures up there too. So again, I guess at both tracks I was the first one to introduce color
Yeah.
of the drivers and the rest of them.
What was the reaction when they first saw the color photos? You remember?
Well, according to my wife, they were really surprised or shocked. They were coming expecting they were going to get a black and white print, and there would be a color one of Victory Lane or whatever. And we did pretty well on it. To get back to a little earlier in the story, but the third week I got there, during the race I was able to keep track of the first three cars. It sticks in my mind. I was able to keep track of the first three cars.
Yeah.
And so I decided to go another week, and it just went on from there. I got before it was over with, I was out there helping line up the cars in between, things, and I would always, car that spun out or was in a wreck and come into the infield, I was always the first one to go check on the driver. At that time, we didn't keep the ambulance in the infield; they were in the pits, and there was usually one wrecker in the infield, but those guys weren't. They were interested in watching the races, or the girls, I don't know which, maybe both. But I always went and checked them, and so I got to be real familiar with the drivers and stuff like that, and I got real comfortable. I assume there are still no guardrails. I haven't been to Erie since the new owner took over, but there were no inside guardrails, so you were basically bare out there, and you had visitors quite frequently. I got quite a few miles in that track too that other people don't have, especially in the turns. But for the most part, I have fun. You have to be careful with them because you never know what's going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and you may be watching action here and there's some back here that you missed, and then you turn around and they're right on your donkey. As if you were up there the night that they were talking about State Line. I mentioned that one of our friend racers liked to terrorize the photographers too.
Not Tom Dill, to mention a name.
Yes, Tom Dill, to mention a name. He and I became fairly good friends, even though he was, at times I got so mad at him I would like to have strangled him for things he did. I remember late in some of the other years that I was there, I did a lot of promotion for the Speedway. Especially once that I took over the whole kind of program of getting the whole thing done, and that just kind of transgressed. It wasn't a thing that I was given the job or anything else. It just kind of happened, and I would come up with promotions. I was first introduced the Trophy Girls. That was mine and my wife's idea, and she kind of kept track of them. We would have every year we would have a contest to pick 2 or 3 Trophy Girls, so we made sure we always had at least one that was available, one queen and the rest, to help. And there were other things that I did, but the track owners, they were pretty liberal with letting me do what I wanted to do. Occasionally besides my regular article in the program, I'll let it out now officially. When I had something very special on my mind, there was a column that appeared that was called Backfire. That the ghost is still alive.
There you go. There you go.
And they were always more pointed. Those were the ones that generally got me in trouble with the track, or they never really got on me. I wrote one article that one of the Franks got. Wasn't Jerry either, but I can't remember the first name of the other one. Don. Yeah. I was in the wintertime. It was hard to write articles on racing around here. There wasn't much of it going on, and at Christmas time, for several years, the racing paper that I wrote for most of the time, I had an article in there, and it was a Christmas article, and it was after Fritz had bought Stateliness Speedway. Well, I got into trouble with him because I wrote an article. Tri-City in Titusville was up for sale, and there had been rumors that he was interested in it. I don't really know if he was or not, because they were rumors, but anyway, I wrote an article, and it started out, it said, you know, for Christmas, the transfer of ownership to Fritz Siemens, you know, it was a wish list. Yeah. And I got a call from him, and he was smoking a little bit under the collar, and seems his wife had gotten a hold of the copy of the paper and read it, and if she would have read it, she would have known that I said it was a wish list, but she thought that was his way of telling her he had bought the track. And so he told me in the future, do not wish anything on him. I got quite a kick out of that. But Don Frank, again, I had written an article, and I quoted somebody who said he thought his track was the best in Northwest Pennsylvania. And Don, he was hot. And you know, I talked to him probably 4 or 5 different times. I even took the magazine and said, look, it says on here, so-and-so said his track was the best. I says, I didn't say that, but he thought I did, and he wanted to know how I could say that and work there and like that. But the rest of the owners, they never said anything, but I could never get him to read it the way that it was written. So, you know, you kind of have to think of those things when you do some of these things, but I guess I was never worried too much about what skullduggery went on behind the scenes, you know. But for the most part, it was a great relationship.
Well, talk a little bit about the guys. You know, we always try to identify. If I'm going to give you a name, maybe something you could, a vignette or something. Leonard Briggs, what was he like?
Leonard was a serious guy. When he talked to you, there was not a lot of small talk. It was just whatever was, you know, on his mind or pertinent to what he was doing. He was easy guy to get along with, and like I said, none of the owners really give me much problem. The Don was probably the most vocal, but he still was not you know, a guy that was looking for trouble or anything, but he would talk the most. He was really pretty relaxed except for the one incident. And Lloyd, I don't know. I had kind of mixed feelings about him. He wasn't adventurous enough, I guess, for me. I mean, he was a good announcer to a point, but I could stand out there and tell you what he was going to say at the start of every race, and that he never altered it. It was always the very same thing, you know. And there, in later years, there came a point where they had gotten disinterested in the Speedway and were thinking and talking about selling it. And Eriez in particular, it always seemed to be the, if we weren't on here, I'd say the bastard child, but it wasn't the favorite track. And I was the first person to put cars in the Mill Creek Mall, race cars. I had problems with some problems with the township police up there because of the way the drivers brought them in, and so I had to establish some rules and regulations on that. But we had several car shows up there. We had some talk about me giving away free tickets, and our philosophies were entirely different. You know, you sometimes how do you know you ain't giving a ticket to a paying customer? So a paying customer gets a free ride once. What's the problem? You know, they don't come alone. They bring somebody with them. You make it up off them. And the last couple years that they were there, I did the promotions at Eriez. Prior to that, I got nothing from them money-wise. I bought my own film. I did my own pictures, and I mean that deal was just 100% Seidler. The program, the stories, you know, they were just a part of the job. I didn't get paid anything, didn't ask for anything, but again, I had some disagreements with them on, I guess, the way they were treating the track. I mean, it obviously was my first love because that's where I started out. And so I went to them. I don't exactly know how it all came about, but I made a deal to do the promotions there, and I was going to get paid by the head of the customers that came in. It had been dropping in the people that were coming, you know, so they figured out what the average had been for the last like 2 years before that, and it was based on that. And so I did some things on my own. One of the things that I insisted on was that at Eriez, Lloyd would not be the announcer. You guys are the first ones I've ever told this to, so I don't know whether I should. I'll leave it up to you whether it goes in or not. But anyway, that was a part of the deal. Again, he was a gentleman. He never said a word to me or about me that I know of, but I hired the guy that was the Corey radio station.
Ron Smith?
Yeah, Ron Smith. Yeah, I hired Ron Smith. and I basically told him, you know, what I wanted, and that he come in and did a good job. Well, I did various promotions, and actually did increase the heads that came through the gate. So it was a good thing. I don't want to really discuss the money because there was a difference in the way the head counts were done and stuff like that. But that wasn't why. I just wanted to prove to him that if you did it what I thought was the right way, you could do it and we did pick up some before they sold it. I did work for the guy that bought it for 1 year. Afterwards, realized where he was headed and left, so I didn't get tarnished by.
That was 85 when you're talking about Charlie Bonta, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Charlie Bonta bought it in 85.
Yep. And at that time, I was still doing the program and all that, but I saw the handwriting on the wall way before other people did, and that's when I left.
Okay, that was the reason you finally quit working at Erie, was when Charlie took over. Well, you worked 1 year.
I worked 1 year, yeah.
Well, okay, now that gets us, now we've got everything in the timeline then. So you worked 13 and a half years, you quit in 85. Yeah, we can work our way back now. Okay, got it.
And you're still at Stateline at the time, or did you
Yeah.
continue at Stateline after you quit here?
No, at the time that they were sold,
Okay.
I quit. I never really had any big deals with Fritz, but I knew enough about him to know that I wouldn't last probably a whole year working for him. And so he did ask me to stay, and I said, no, I'm done. At that time, I was starting to be involved in quite heavily in NASCAR. So I just kind of dropped out and did my NASCAR thing and did it. But I just, my own feelings was I wasn't going to give him the chance to fire me. You know, it was.
Did you even work for him 1 year then, Olen? Did you ever work for Fritz at all then?
No, I used the sale as the.
Opportunity.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
so you
mean.
quit it. All right, got it.
I want to get back to some of the cover your donkey, I think was the term you used. You're out there naked on the track. You've gotten to know some of the drivers. And as you're taking, as you said, I'm just thinking, you got your left eye cocked and you're shooting with your right eye and you're focused on an image, as I am you right here. All of a sudden you don't know what Randy Anderson's doing or anybody else. You don't have a wingman.
Nope.
To say, hey, look out, here. Were there some close calls?
Oh yes, my biggest worry was not in the drivers. I mean, they get loose. You get so. I worked with 15 feet off of the dirt. That was my standard area, approximately, and. I worried more, especially later at night, of slipping on the grass, not being able to move. Occasionally we would get a paper from the Post-Journal or one of the Erie papers that would come out and want to do some photography or whatever. At both tracks while I was there, the standard rule was that if somebody wanted to come out they had to talk to me first. That the track course owner would tell them, well, you got to talk to him. If he says okay, okay, and if not, you can't be out there. And the reason that I did that was because some people will listen to you, some people won't. And I didn't want to be responsible for somebody, getting hit. But I still realized at least what I thought would be a thrill for them if they got a chance to do it. So mostly they had to be connected with a paper or something. Occasionally I would let somebody else out there that I thought, but mostly you had to have a press connection, I'll put it that way. And I never refused any paper or any request. Well, yeah, I guess I did once, but that involved a death, and it wasn't at Erie. But most of the time, I let them have any picture I had. Didn't matter to me. So what was?
No, I think one of the questions, you talk about drivers. You had a Tom Dill story. We didn't finish that Tom Dill story, by the way. Everybody else has a Tom Dill story. You must too.
Well, Tom Dill, like I said, he was a terror in more ways than one. Every track you go to's got their own story about Tom Dill, jumping on a hood, stomping his foot through a windshield, and so on and so forth. And it really did happen. But he, one particular night, he got loose and he came into the infield, and I started to run, and he kept coming and coming and coming, and he actually chased me clear to the flagpole. And then he went back out on the track. And I walked back down to the turn, and about the third lap of the next race or something, I guess I had time to think about it or something. It dawned on me that, he was only like a foot off of me at times. One time when he did this, he actually touched the camera in my hand. But anyway, and I got to thinking, he couldn't have been that close to me and chased me that far without having that car under control. And I had a temper when I was young. I was a redhead, and there was fire there sometimes. So I walked out at the end of the race, in between races. I walked out into the pits, and I was like a banny rooster with a head rooster, and I told him what I thought about him, and I didn't appreciate it and all this and that and something, and he just stood there, a little bit of a grin on his face, and I turned around and walked back out on the track, and then the next week, I walked into the pits, and he and his gang were there, and they were standing in front of their car, and they motioned for me to come over, and I shook my head no, because I was still ticked off at him. And come here, and I don't remember which one of them, but he made 2 or 3 steps and says, come here a minute, don't be like that, So I come right here, and I walk around the front of the car, and Tom's standing there like this, just looking at me, not saying a word. And I looked down, and printed in letters about this big was photographer catcher across the bumper. I said, you SOB, and turned around and walked away. But that was typical Tom Dill. Another story. I told you that I did some promotions, and one of the nights I dreamed up a rollover contest at Eriez Speedway. And I got 5 people to sign up to jump in a car and come out on the track and roll them over. I think I offered like a $50 prize, if I'm not mistaken, but that's immaterial in the whole thing. And well, didn't go too good. They had had the 5 guys come out, and they lined up there, and none of them actually rolled a car. And I'm kind of disappointed, but you know, it's what heck. All of a sudden I look up and there's a 6th car out on the track. Where the heck did that come from? You know, so I walked back and I got right to the car, and he says, "Don't say a word about who's in here." I said, "What the hell are you doing out here?" And it was Tom Dill. Where he got the car, got no idea. And he says, "I'm going to show these guys how to roll a car over." I said, "You didn't sign up for it. I ain't so sure about the insurance." He said, just get out of the way and let me do my thing, you know. And I said, "I don't know about this, you know. We're, you know," and the people in the stands were kind of like, you know. So finally, I says, "Okay, well, he rolled the car." And I mean, so he saved me, really, you know. But it was, don't tell anybody who's in the car. And I never did say who was driving the car. I think there were people that figured it out. But now, obviously, there were people in the pits that must have known who drove out there, you know. But I never said who did it, you know. And so, but he was always doing something like that. There was a time when there was a driver that got reckless out there, and I don't really remember what it was that he did that made me mad. But I was like a banny rooster, and I was back in the pits, and if I'd have been smart, I would have stayed out in the track, because that guy could have picked me up with one hand and crunched me. He was a tough kid, and I knew it, you know, and he'd been in other scrapes too. But anyway, I went out and I chewed him out royally, and he just basically stood there and took it. And when I turned around to walk away, about 10 feet behind me stood Tom Dill, watching my back, you know. And I never forgot that for as long. I never said anything to anybody, but I never forgot that he probably saved. I knew the guy wouldn't touch him with me with him back there when it was all over, but I didn't know he was there to begin with, and at that time I guess I didn't care. But Tom was a unique guy. There's certain people that stand out. I hadn't talked to Jay Plyler in probably 12, 15 years. He was quite a popular driver. He had a late model and a coupe, and I had a friend that lived in Warren, and I asked him to see if he could find his phone number anywhere, and he did. And I called him up one night last winter. It was a Saturday night, and I called, and by golly, he answered the phone. And I said, "Jay?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "This is a voice from your past." I said, "Don't hang up on me." And he goes, "Okay." So I started talking to him, you know, and I'm asking him things, and he's not guessing who it was. And finally I said to him, I said, "You remember a promotion at Eriez Speedway where we had the Army out there, and they brought some equipment and stuff?" And he says, "Yeah." And I said, "You remember me talking to you about going out and on the track and doing 2 laps while they were sitting up in the corner?" I remember something about it. I said, "I had the machine gunner up there shoot blanks at your car as you went by." And I had tipped, the only one I had done was I had tipped Ron Smith off because of what was happening, because he was doing the announcing of it, you know. And so there goes the rat-a-tat-tat-tat. Well, Jay Plyler's wife, she is a quiet little gal. She was so mad at me because I had them shooting at Jay when he went around the track. I saw her up at Warren Fair one night, and she still was telling me about that, you know. Funny things like that, you know. Everything was like there was a family, and you know, pranks were pulled, and it was a fun type thing, you know. I had a bikini contest a couple of times up there, and different things to bring people in. That one scared me. Yeah, the girls could wear a bikini to get in. Well, what they did was they wore a bikini to get in and then brought clothes and put the clothes back on. And so when I got time for the contest, instead of having about 20 girls, I had like 6 that came down on the track. But anyway, I had I guess it was enough. Yeah. I think she was the first one. And but again, you know, it was just a case of where they pretty much let me do what I wanted to do, and you don't find that in most places. And I remember particularly Skip Furlow. He was always a real nice, quiet guy. And he and Scott Gerdak was the start of a late model race. First lap, coming in, I was down in turn 1 and 2, and they tangled somehow and ended up spinning with their tail end up against the outer guardrail or the fence, and of course the Thundering Herd was down coming out of 4, and I looked up and I knew the cars were coming, and I think one of them may have stalled, but he started it. And I looked out there, and I swear to this day, I saw Skip Furlow looking at me. And I went like this. Well, there was no doubt Gerdak had to go to that side of me to get back out on the track. But where did that leave Furlow? Yeah. I had 2 choices, stand or run out on the track. But there were 18 or 20 cars coming behind them. So I went like this, and they both in unison come down, and both sides. And that's the first time that in all the time I was there that I heard the crowd above the roar of the cars. And they missed me, not by much, but they missed me. I just stood there, and went down after the race, took the pictures of the cars, and then came back out and walked out to the turn again, and I looked up, and Furlow's coming out of the pit. And he walks right over to me, and he says, "God, Seidler, I don't know when I was so thankful for somebody telling me where to go." And I said, well, I didn't have too many choices. And we kind of laughed about it. The strange part about that was that later on at another time, and it actually was at State Line, not at Eriez, but Furlow and Gerdak got into it again. I don't think one was probably related to the other. I never made that connection, but anyway, Furlow was taken out of the race, and he come into the infield, and there was another wreck, and he started over to where Gerdak was, and I was headed that way too, and he got there, and I saw he was mad, and he didn't really have that much of a temper, but anyway, I saw him going. I grabbed a hold of his arm, and I said, "Skip, no," you know, and I know Morton said no, and he did, and I was halfway in the car with a fist, and I got a little bit of a bruise, but it didn't, you know, but I made up my mind, well, don't grab a guy's fist if you think it's going to go, because I was pretty, I wasn't a big guy. And I used to kid him about that, But, so, I mean, there are all kinds of things that went on that the fans in the stands have no idea what was happening. And there are certain things that stand out, and if you went race by race and car by car, or the kinds of cars, there were things that happened with each one of them. You could go on probably for 100 years, or especially when you spend as much time out there as I did. I had, I can remember, there wasn't much I regretted. When they first started allowing the spectator cars out there, the rules were pretty loose, but we did have a rule. There was to be no batteries in the car, and I generally kind of took it upon myself to police that. Whenever I would talk to a driver, I would look, I mean, I wouldn't just go look, but I was doing it, and I caught this one guy. He had a battery on the passenger side and inside, and because they didn't have the fortification and all, batteries would get broke quite frequently and like that. And that was one of the reasons why we didn't want him inside the car. And this kid had it. I was standing in the pit entrance, and that night I guess I was looking. Oh, I know what I was doing. I was looking to make sure they had fire suits on. And I caught the battery, and so I pulled him over, and I'm telling him, you can't go out there with this. And he said, well, the technicians in the thing that I said, did they see it? Well, I don't know. It was there, well, I let him go, and about the third lap, he got clipped and battery broke. He got burned, but not, thank God, not bad. But so after that, there was no waivers. No waivers for me, and the same way with fire suits. And some of them were real clever. They'd have these two-piece fire suits, and they'd have it on up top, but down below they didn't have them on, So I'd stand at the entrance, and I could just keep going like this as they come, and I sent more than one back to the pits, Ed Nelson knew what I was doing, and I had signals with him. If the guy didn't stop, I would let him know that, and he'd yellow flag him and red flag him, and we'd make them get out. It only took a couple times until they started. But be hot, and you can't blame them, but it was still for their own good. So there was things. Ed was a good guy to work with. I got him in trouble one night. He was still starting cars from down on the track when I first started, and I had gone to him, and I said to him, when we get to the late model feature, I said, I'd like to have the cars come out in the double row, and I said, widen out at the front in like a V, and I said, I want you to stand out in the middle of the track, and I want to lay between your legs and shoot the cars coming out of the turn, ground up. Well, it's a neat picture, excepting there was one guy that didn't get the message.
Oh, no.
And when the V opened up, he come up through the middle. Well, Ed and I both scrambled, and it was close to one of us getting hit. So Leonard Briggs, he was not very happy with that, and I said, well, it was my fault. I said, don't blame him. It was my fault. I was the one that. It would have worked all right if that guy had. But anyway, so I was apologizing to Ed, and he says, hey, he's right. He said, I could have said no. And so again, there was no harm done, really. It was only.
Did you get a shot?
Yeah, I got the shot. I don't remember what I did with it, but I got the shot for I scrambled.
Yeah.
But and you know, it was like was only a week or two later that he did get hit, and that's when they made him stop starting him down there. So you know, it was like.
You never got hit though, did you? I mean, other than the time they'll touch and.
No, I never actually got hit by a car. No, it's. I don't know how that happened. I started a story about, you know, letting other photographers out on the track. I had a rule that if they came out there, that they couldn't be within 15 feet of any direction of being behind me, because I didn't want to have to wonder who I was going to run around.
Right.
And usually if they did come out, I'd say to them, well, what corner do you want, or whatever, I'll go somewhere else. Sometimes I did work the back stretch, but that's actually more dangerous than the turns are. And
for fear that the car would get away.
well, yeah,
At a high speed.
right. And the other thing is that they by that time they were really accelerating, and if they hit somebody or come off, they would get in on you a lot quicker.
Right.
And so it was just a matter of things that you learn, you know, when you're out there. You know, I've seen cars pop up out of the middle, you know, and have no place to land except upside down. So I would usually go somewhere else. And one night there was a guy from the Post-Journal. He'd been out there a couple times, and he come out and he wanted to go down and turn 4 because that's where I always went. It's not where I always went. I never had a set. I'd do the picture, come out, and go here, there, somewhere else. It was sometimes it would be because I knew that they were all having trouble in turn 4 or whatever, you know, turn 3. And anyway, he wanted to turn 4 because that was where. So I said, okay, you go down turn 4. And I walked up and went out on the back on turn 2. 3 laps into the race, number 5 hooligan raced there a lot.
Stanko?
Yes, Stanko. I don't know how he did it, but he pops up out of 2 or 3 other cars. Actually, the car just popped up, came down, caught fire. And of course, I got the picture and scampered, and they're cleaning up the mess, and the guy down there coming, he says, "How'd you know where to go?" I said, "Well, part of it's luck, and part of it's just knowing what happens sometimes, you know." I said, I don't have it choreographed. I said, they don't tell me where they're going to wreck. You just get a feeling for maybe they're having and it might be late models are turn 1 and the hooligans are turn 4. You know, I mean, you watch them race, and you get used to the way a certain driver covers the track, and if he's not in that groove, he must be having a problem or something. So you kind of keep an eye on him. And again, that's all stuff that you just kind of learn and becomes second nature. And one of the funniest things that happened to me one night, I was in the middle of track. The races were over, and I was picking up my gear and all. And this lady comes walking up to me, and she goes, "Mr. Seidler," and I said, "Mr. Seidler's my dad. He's out in the pits." And she said, "Well," she says, "my husband and I, we get the biggest kick out of watching you out there in the infield." She says, "Boy, you can really run for an old man." And I goes, "Well, how old do you think I am?" Well, of course, she knew she had stepped in a puddle.
She crossed the line.
Yeah, and she said, "Well, you got to be at least 50. I said, "No, I'm 35 years old." And she says, "Really?" And I said, "Well," she says, "you can still run fast." And but that it was funny, you know, that to think that they were watching me instead of the.
You're part of the fabric.
Yeah,
sure.
it goes with the deal, you know. I've been in dirt tracks all over the area here, and
Did you ever take movies?
no, never.
Did anybody ever take movies? Do you remember seeing anybody?
I never saw anybody take movies.
Me neither.
I don't.
We've looked.
I had a movie, but a camera, but see, that would have interfered with the, because I couldn't use them in the program,
Right.
and so no, I don't know of anybody that ever did, and I don't know of anybody that ever was in the infield, you know, because they would have had to have
Check with you.
checked with me.
When you were the photographer, were you the exclusive photographer for the Speedway, or did you ever have someone else out there working with you or against you?
I was exclusive, and you couldn't get at both tracks when I was there. You couldn't get out in the middle without my okay. Even if you were from the Post Journal or wherever. And I wasn't worried about the competition because the rule was nobody else could sell pictures there, even if they had them from another area. Because I wasn't getting paid by the track, so I had the exclusive rights. And like I say, and I started out as just a photographer, and then it grew over a period of time, you know, working with a flagman. You'd see things that needed attention or whatever. There's a guy that drove one of the sportsman cars, and I've looked through the book, tried to remember what his name was, but one night at Eriez, he got into a wreck, but the car wasn't really wrecked. He came into the infield and it wasn't running, you know, like that. And as I said, I always went over and checked on him. I got there and I realized that he was in trouble. I really didn't know what the trouble was, but I was getting no response or anything from him, and I kind of stuck my head up in there, and I don't even know how I did it, to be honest with you, but I stuck my finger in his mouth, and he snapped out of it. He had swallowed his tongue, and the paramedics give me hell. They said, he could have bit your finger off. I said, well, he was choking to death, and he couldn't do anything. He was strapped in, you know, and I mean, I did it without thinking. It was just a reflex action, you know, but I've heard more than once that so-and-so told me you saved his life, and he come the next week and, you know, thanked me. I said, hey, you know, it's nothing to it, you know, I'm glad I was there, you know, but I don't know who he was. Like I said, I saw him. People see you out there and get the feeling that you're a part of them and the deal, and they'll approach you on the street thinking you know them when you really didn't even know they kind of existed. If you remember when they used to have these stores called Mason stores, there was one in Erie and a couple of other places. They were like a Macy's or something like that, a cheaper version. I was in there one time around Christmas time, and I was looking for a jacket, and I'm on this thing, and I hear this man and woman, it is so. No, it ain't. I know it is. No, it ain't, you know. And I'm thinking, boy, they're really getting into an argument, you know. And then all of a sudden, why, stops, and the woman comes around the end of the counter, and she said, excuse me. And I said, yes. And I'm going, oh, I wonder what's going on here. are you the track photographer at Eriez? And I said, yes. See, I told you so. They were arguing over me, but I come home and I told my wife, I said, I can't believe that December they're arguing over, but but they come up to you and carry on a conversation like you should know them, and it's entertaining, and yet it's like, golly, I never thought about that when I was doing it. It was just, and I think about how I went there against my will, and then where it actually led to,
I know you're supposed to be kind of not playing favorites and stuff out there, but clearly you had guys that